I'll never forget the day I decided to take that trek through the Alaskan wilderness. Everyone had warned me, but I thought they were exaggerating. I was young, naive, and far too confident in my own survival skills. The month was late October. The trees were already bare, the sun barely touched the horizon, and the cold bite of the wind gnawed at my skin. But nothing, could prepare me for what I was about to experience. It started simple enough, a solo hike near Denali National Park. I wanted the solitude, the quiet, to prove to myself I could handle the isolation. I remember the feeling of being completely alone out there, with nothing but the sounds of the wind and the occasional crunch of snow underfoot. But as the days passed, the wilderness began to feel like something else, something that was watching me, something that was waiting. I had set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by dense trees. The silence was so deep, it made my ears ring. That first night, as I sat by the fire, I swore I heard footsteps in the snow, heavy, deliberate. But when I got up to check, there was nothing. Just the wind, and the eerie quiet that seemed to grow thicker as the night went on. That was when I first felt it, something watching me, something close, just beyond the reach of the firelight. But when you're in the wilderness, your mind plays tricks on you. I convinced myself it was just a bear or some other animal, trying to stay warm near my camp. I didn't know what was out there. But whatever it was, it wasn't friendly. The next day, I decided to push further into the woods, ignoring the gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. The day passed without incident, but as the sun began to set again, I found something strange, something that made my blood run cold. In the snow, just a few yards off the trail, I found a strange pattern. It wasn't animal tracks, it was too neat for that. It looked like a large human figure, but with long, unnatural steps, like someone or something had been walking barefoot in the freezing cold. The prints were deep, almost unnaturally so, like something far heavier than a human had left them. And they led off into the thickest part of the forest, where no sunlight touched. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my breath freezing in the air, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be made. Whatever made those prints wasn't human. It was then I realized I had ventured too far, and whatever was out there was not something I could fight off. It was too big, too ancient. And it was coming for me. I turned to leave, but the forest seemed to close in around me. I could feel something moving, just behind the trees. Something watching, something waiting. It wasn't a bear or any other animal, it was something else, something I couldn't understand. And as the wind picked up, carrying a strange, almost unearthly sound, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The sound was there again, the heavy footsteps, like something large was circling my camp, just beyond the firelight. The fire flickered, and I could swear I saw something move in the shadows. That was the first night I heard it, the whispering. It was faint at first. The whispering. Just a sound in the wind, or so I thought. But as the night wore on, it grew louder, more distinct. It was as if the forest itself was speaking, urging me to listen, to understand. But I couldn't make out the words. My heart raced as I sat there, clutching my knife, unable to look away from the darkness that surrounded me. The fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced like twisted shapes on the snow. I could feel the cold gnawing at my skin, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver, it was the sound. The whispering, so close now, like it was right behind me. I dared not turn around. I felt a presence, something looming just beyond the reach of the light, something that didn't belong. I stood up, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, trying to steady myself. I grabbed my pack and threw it over my shoulder, prepared to leave the camp. I knew I had to get out of there, now. But as I turned to go, the whispering stopped. Dead silence. And then came the thud. The ground beneath me shook as if something massive had just landed. It wasn't an animal, this was different. Too heavy, too deliberate. It was close. Too close. I froze, barely able to breathe. I could hear something moving through the trees, slow, methodical steps, like it was savoring each one. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, as if the very air around me was keeping me grounded. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. The forest was again silent. The wind howled, but there was no sound of movement, no rustling in the trees, no footfalls in the snow. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and bolted, running blindly through the trees, knowing that whatever was out there was much faster than I could ever be. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare slow down. My only thought was to put distance between myself and whatever was hunting me. I ran for what felt like hours, the darkness swallowing me whole, until I stumbled across a small creek. I skidded to a halt at the water's edge, gasping for air. My breath formed clouds in the cold air, but I didn't dare stop moving. I followed the creek, hoping it would lead me to some kind of safety, some sign of civilization. But the further I went, the more it felt like the forest was closing in on me. The trees seemed to shift, the shadows seemed to grow longer, and I swore I could hear the faint whispering again, just at the edge of my hearing. I didn't know how long I had been running when I found the body. The body was barely visible at first, just a lump against the stark white snow, partially buried, as though it had been there for a while. My heart stopped when I saw it. I wasn't sure if I should approach, if I should even look closer. But something about it drew me in, something I couldn't explain. The whispering was gone now, replaced by a thick silence that seemed to weigh down on the land. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. I slowly moved forward, my boots crunching on the snow with each careful step. As I got closer, the outline of the body became clearer, an adult male, dressed in heavy, worn clothing, though not much else remained of the person. The figure was sprawled awkwardly, face down in the snow, hands frozen in a position like he had been trying to claw at something, trying to get away from something. I felt my stomach churn. The most horrifying thing, however, was what I saw next, the eyes. Even though the man was face down, his eyes were wide open, staring up at me, though his face was frozen in a grotesque expression of terror. There was no mistaking it, this man had died in unimaginable fear. I knelt beside him, but I knew I was making a mistake. I shouldn't have gotten closer. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch his arm, to confirm he was truly dead. But as I touched him, the air around me shifted, cold enough to freeze the very breath in my chest. A faint, hollow laugh echoed through the trees, and the man's mouth twisted into a grimace, his lips pulled back as though he were trying to scream. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I had no idea if the laugh had come from him or from something else. But I didn't need to know. I had to get out of there. But as I turned to leave, I froze. There, just behind me, I saw movement. A shadow passed between the trees, tall and angular. It was impossible to make out any features, but I could feel its presence, like a cold weight pressing in on me. It was watching me. Waiting. And I knew, deep down, it had been following me the entire time. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I broke into a full sprint, my legs pumping faster than they ever had before, pushing me forward through the snow and trees. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, moving as if alive, reaching out to grab me, to pull me into whatever hell they came from. I ran for what felt like an eternity, each breath burning in my chest, my legs aching with exhaustion. But no matter how fast I ran, the feeling of being chased never left. It was getting closer. And then, through the trees ahead of me, I saw something that made my heart stop. A cabin. It wasn't much, just a small, weathered building, barely visible in the distance. But it was shelter. It was safety. Or at least, I hoped it would be. I staggered toward it, my body moving on sheer adrenaline, my mind barely able to process what was happening. I reached the door and yanked it open, crashing inside and slamming it shut behind me. I thought I was safe. I thought I had outrun whatever was out there. I was wrong. The whispering returned, but it wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the cabin with me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. For a moment, I stood there, gasping for air, my entire body trembling with the cold and the fear that gnawed at me. My mind was a blur of thoughts, trying to process what had happened, trying to understand what I had just witnessed in the forest. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, something was wrong. The whispering. It was back. But this time, it wasn't just a faint sound in the wind. It was a low murmur, a voice, or maybe 100 voices, all speaking at once, soft and maddening, like a chant. It seemed to come from every corner of the cabin, but when I turned toward the walls, there was nothing there, nothing but the old, peeling wood and the dust of years gone by. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the small, dimly lit cabin. There was nothing extraordinary about it, a bed in the corner, a rusty stove, and a few pieces of old furniture scattered about. But there was something about it, something about the way it felt, that made the air thick and suffocating. It was as though the very walls were alive, pulsing with energy I couldn't explain. The whispering grew louder, the voices now seeming to circle around me, closing in, as if they were trying to drown me in their noise. It was unbearable. My hands shook as I stumbled toward the far wall, trying to block out the sound. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could feel the cold sweat running down my back, soaking through my jacket. And then, through the haze of sound, I heard something else, footsteps. I froze. They weren't coming from outside. They were inside the cabin, moving deliberately toward me. Slow, methodical steps. I could hear them on the creaky wooden floorboards, each one like a death sentence, each one drawing closer. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught in the grip of whatever nightmare had become my reality. The footsteps were almost upon me now. I finally managed to tear my gaze away from the dark corner where the sound was coming from. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, cloaked in darkness. Its shape was barely discernible, just a silhouette against the dim light of the cabin. But I knew it was there. I could feel it, its presence suffocating the very air around me. It didn't move, not at first. It just stood there, watching me, as the whispering grew louder, more urgent. I could feel the weight of its gaze, like it was peeling away my very soul. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, and no sound came out. And then, the figure stepped forward. It wasn't human. Not fully. Its limbs were long and twisted, far too long, and its fingers stretched out like claws, tapping lightly on the floor as it moved. The skin, if you could even call it that, was pale, almost translucent, like it had never seen the light of day. Its face was the most horrifying part, if you could even call it a face. It was hollow, gaunt, with hollow black eyes that seemed to absorb all light, and a mouth twisted into a grotesque, silent scream. I couldn't move. I was trapped in its gaze, unable to tear my eyes away from it. The whispering grew louder, now mixing with low growls, unintelligible sounds that made my skin crawl. It stopped just in front of me, and for a moment, it seemed to study me, its breath, or what I assumed to be breath, cold and shallow, like it hadn't needed to breathe in years. Then, without warning, it reached out, its clawed hand brushing lightly against my face. The touch was freezing. But it wasn't the cold that made me shudder, it was the feeling, like something dead had just touched me, something that had never been alive. Suddenly, the world around me seemed to spin, as if I were being pulled under a thick, black fog. The whispering became a roar, and my vision blurred, the cabin around me stretching and warping. I felt myself falling, my knees giving out beneath me, and I hit the ground hard. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the whispering, no longer soft but deafening, surrounding me, inside me. And then, silence. I woke up on the cold, hard floor of the cabin, the faint light of dawn creeping in through the cracked windows. My head throbbed painfully, and when I touched it, I could feel dried blood on my forehead. I wasn't sure how long I had been unconscious, but something had changed. I was no longer alone. I didn't know how long I'd been out, but when I woke up, everything felt different. The air was colder, the silence deeper, as if the forest had closed in around the cabin and the whole world outside had vanished. I slowly rose to my feet, my head spinning, the taste of metal on my tongue. The room was dim, only a faint light seeping through the cracks in the cabin walls, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. The figure was gone. The one that had stood over me in the darkness, its clawed hand brushing my face. But I knew, deep in my gut, that it hadn't left. It was still there, waiting, watching. I could feel its presence lingering in the air, thick and oppressive, like something was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. I staggered to my feet, trying to steady myself. My body ached all over, and my skin felt like it was crawling. The cold had sunk deep into my bones. I turned to the door, thinking maybe I could make a run for it, but before I could even take a step, I heard something, a sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. The door creaked open. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal. Someone, or something, had opened the door. I backed away, heart pounding in my chest. My body screamed at me to leave, to get out of the cabin, but my legs refused to move. I had no idea what was waiting for me out there, but I knew it was just as bad as what was inside. And then, I saw it. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray light outside. It wasn't the same one from before, not exactly, but it was something just as terrifying. This one was shorter, hunched over, its back arched in a way that seemed unnatural. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, too wide, too bright, like it was staring directly into my soul. It didn't move at first, just stood there, watching me with those cold, lifeless eyes. The whispering started again, louder now, echoing in my head, like the voices were coming from all around me. I tried to block it out, but it was impossible. The sound was too overwhelming, too close. Then, the creature stepped inside. It was slow at first, its movements jerky and unnatural, like it was struggling to keep its form together. It stopped in the middle of the cabin, its head tilting to one side, and I could feel its gaze on me, like it was studying me, deciding something. I backed up further, but there was nowhere to go. My heart was hammering, my legs shaking with fear, but I had no choice. I was trapped. The creature let out a low, guttural noise, a growl mixed with something that almost sounded like a laugh. Its mouth opened wide, revealing teeth too sharp, too many, stretching impossibly long, like it was about to tear into me. But instead of lunging at me, it spoke. "Leave, before it's too late." Its voice wasn't human. It was more like a chorus of whispers, like it was speaking through hundreds of voices at once. The sound crawled under my skin, vibrating through my bones. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, to fight. But I knew that none of that would matter. I was not going to survive this unless I did exactly what it said. I didn't know what too late meant, but I knew I couldn't wait to find out. I forced my legs to move, backing toward the door. But just as I reached for the handle, the creature let out a loud, piercing shriek, and the entire cabin seemed to shake with it. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat, and before I could make another move, the door slammed shut on its own. I was locked inside. The creature stepped closer, its glowing eyes never leaving mine. The air felt like it was closing in around me, crushing the life out of me with every breath. "Too late," it whispered again, and this time, I felt the weight of the words. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. I realized then that I wasn't meant to survive. Not out here. Not in this cursed wilderness. But I was wrong. There was one thing the creature didn't expect. I wasn't going down without a fight. My mind was spinning, my heart racing, but in that moment of pure panic, something inside me snapped. The creature had just said that it was too late, that I wasn't going to survive. But the truth was, I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not without understanding what this thing was, and why it was hunting me. It crept closer, its movements unnatural, twisted. Its sharp, jagged claws scraped against the floorboards as it advanced toward me, its wide eyes locked onto mine like a predator sizing up its prey. I had no weapon, no way of defending myself, but I wasn't about to let it claim me so easily. The cabin felt smaller now, suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the whispering intensified, echoing through every inch of the room, clawing at my thoughts. The air smelled of decay, of something old and forgotten, and I could feel the cold seep deeper into my skin. I had to move. I had to act fast. The creature was almost upon me now. Its breathing, or whatever passed for it, was ragged, like it was struggling to hold its form together. I knew it was close enough to strike. It reached out its clawed hand, and I instinctively ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the swipe that would have torn through me. The creature's sharp nails scraped the wood of the cabin with an awful screech, and I used the momentary distraction to lunge for the stove. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing I could use. My hands found the cold metal, and I yanked open the small compartment beneath it. There was nothing but old, rusted pots and some remnants of dry wood. But as my fingers brushed over the cold metal, they found something sharp, a knife, half buried under the rust. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it was everything. I gripped the knife, my fingers numb around its handle. The creature didn't pause, it was relentless, its glowing eyes now burning with a hunger that made my blood run cold. I could hear the scraping of its claws on the floor as it drew closer, but now I wasn't just waiting for death. I was ready to fight. As it lunged again, its claws reaching for me, I twisted away, my body moving on pure adrenaline. I slashed out with the knife, feeling the cold steel bite into something soft. The creature let out a howl, a high-pitched screech that reverberated through my bones. It recoiled, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it staggered back, its long arms stretching unnaturally as it tried to regain its balance. That was when I saw it, a small, faint crack in the wall, just behind the creature, barely noticeable in the dim light. I didn't know if it would lead to anything, but it was my only chance. My eyes locked onto the crack, and a burst of strength surged through me. I ran toward it, the knife still gripped tightly in my hand. But the creature wasn't far behind. I made it to the crack and wedged my shoulder against it, feeling the wall give slightly. My breath was ragged now, my body screaming for rest, but I couldn't stop. I shoved against the wall, the crack widening enough for me to squeeze through. Just as I started to slip into the space behind the wall, I felt a sharp pain tear through my side. The creature had caught me. Its claws had sunk deep into my flesh, tearing through my jacket and into my skin. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the deafening whispering that surrounded me. My head spun as I pushed harder against the wall, desperation fueling my movements. The pain in my side was unbearable, but I couldn't let it drag me back. With one final push, the crack widened enough for me to squeeze through, and I tumbled into a small, hidden space on the other side. I gasped for breath, the knife still clutched tightly in my hand, my blood staining the floor beneath me. I could hear the creature clawing at the wall behind me, its growls mixing with the terrible, twisting whispers that seemed to fill the entire cabin. But it couldn't reach me. Not yet. I pressed my back against the cold stone of the hidden space, trying to calm my breathing, trying to stay silent. The pain in my side was intense, but I couldn't think about that now. I had to survive. I wasn't sure how long I stayed there, listening to the creature's frustration as it searched for me, but eventually, the sounds began to fade. The whispers grew quieter, and the heavy thud of its footsteps moved away. The cabin grew still, and I thought for a moment that it was over, that the creature had given up. But I knew better. It wasn't finished with me. And I wasn't finished with it. The silence in the hidden space was suffocating. The only sound I could hear was my own breath, shallow and ragged, as I lay pressed against the cold stone wall. My side was throbbing with pain, the blood from the deep claw marks slowly soaking into my clothes, but I forced myself to stay still, to remain as quiet as possible. The creature might have given up for now, but I knew it wasn't done with me. It never would be. I dared a glance around the cramped space, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. It was like a small storage area, filled with old tools, rotting wood, and broken pieces of furniture. The smell of decay was overwhelming. There was no way out from here, just walls and shadows. But something caught my eye, a small hatch in the floor, barely visible in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what lay beneath, but it was my only option. Ignoring the pain in my side, I crawled toward the hatch, the sharp sting in my wounds almost making me collapse. I fumbled with the rusty latch, struggling to open it, until finally, it gave way with a creak. Cold air rushed up from beneath, carrying a smell of earth and dampness. It was an underground passage. My escape. I didn't waste a second. I slid into the small hole, pulling the hatch shut behind me, praying it would hold. The passage was tight, and I had to crawl, my body sore and weak from the struggle. The ground was uneven, and every movement sent a shock of pain through my side. But I had no choice. I had to keep moving. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense, as if the earth itself were shifting beneath me. The whispers had died down, but I knew the creature was still out there, still hunting me. I could feel its presence, pressing down on me like a weight. The very walls of the tunnel seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as though the land itself was alive and aware. Eventually, the tunnel opened up into a small chamber, and I froze. There, in the center, was a figure. It wasn't the creature I had faced before, but it was just as terrifying, a tall, hunched form, its face hidden in shadow, standing motionless. I could feel its gaze on me, though it hadn't moved. I knew what this was. It was a part of the creature, or perhaps a manifestation of the thing that had been hunting me through the woods. It wasn't a single entity, it was something much older, something ancient. This place was its lair. This was where it lived. I couldn't outrun it anymore. I had no more strength left to run, no more places to hide. The battle had to end here. With a final surge of adrenaline, I reached for the knife I had carried with me, the only weapon I had. It felt light in my hand now, but it was all I had. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its power growing, a wave of cold that seemed to swallow the very air around me. I stepped forward, my legs shaking, the knife trembling in my hand. The figure remained still, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. And then, with one last defiant scream, I charged. The creature, no, the entity, reacted faster than I ever could have imagined. It swung its arm, a blur of motion, and knocked me back with a force that sent me sprawling across the floor. My vision blurred, and I felt my consciousness slipping away, but I refused to give in. I was too close. I couldn't die here, not like this. I pushed myself up again, my side burning with agony, and I plunged the knife into the creature's chest. The air around me cracked with a deafening, otherworldly screech as the knife made contact. For a moment, everything went still. The chamber seemed to freeze, and then, the figure let out a final, horrifying cry. The earth beneath me trembled, the walls of the chamber cracking, and the air thickened with a pressure I could barely stand. I pulled the knife out, my hands slick with blood, and backed away, gasping for breath. The creature's form began to twist and convulse, its body disintegrating into a mass of shadow and smoke, as though it were unraveling, fading into the darkness. The whispering grew louder, deafening, and then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, it stopped. The silence was crushing. I stood there, bloodied and exhausted, my chest heaving, staring at the empty space where the creature had been. The chamber around me seemed to shrink, the weight of everything I had just experienced crashing down on me. I had survived. Somehow, impossibly, I had survived. But I knew this wouldn't be over. The thing I had faced, the thing that had hunted me through the Alaskan wilderness, was ancient, an evil older than the land itself. It would find its way back. It always did. But for now, I was alive. And that was all that mattered. As I stumbled toward the exit, the cold air brushing my face, I realized one thing. This was just the beginning.